how important in the Christian web of belief is Melchizedek?
Melchizedek is a typological precursor to Christ that is also a representative federal head. And it's the Bible has a lot of typology representation in it, so it's important in that to which Jesus entered into the priesthood upon his baptism, fulfilling Old Testament requirements. So that's important. And he holds the priesthood by himself, and no one else does. That reflects on Mormon heresies and things like that. And also, Melchizedek deals with possible representation of Christ's existence and things. But there's just different stuff.
All right. So before the people who are a lot smarter than me get to Matt, I just want to ask him one pretty simple question. Matt, do you think the hypostatic union makes logical sense? If so, how?
The hypostatic union?
Yeah.
Could you find the hypostatic union?
Christ is 100% God, 100% man at the same time.
That's not how we would define it, but I understand what you mean. We would say that he has two distinct and simultaneous natures in the one person, hypostatic union. That in the one person of Christ is both a divine nature and a human nature.
Not
That's just
100%.
the hypostatic union. Well, to say 100% and 100% leads to a bit of equivocation in that you say, well, that's 200%. We don't speak like that. So in order to avoid that unnecessary complication, we just say he has two distinct natures. And that's what the hypostatic union is.
So Christ. I'm sorry.
No, that's okay. Go ahead. No, it's all right.
So Christ having the fullness of deity, I'll just equate to 100%, and him being fully man, I'll just equate to 100%.
Well, we'd say that each of the natures is completely and totally by nature what it is. The divine nature is a divine nature. The human nature is a human nature. It's like I'm a man. What do I say? I'm 100% man? Well, if I walk around, puffing my chest out and beating my chest, am I saying I'm more of a 100% man? It's not really a meaningful statement. No offense meant, but you know what I'm saying.
Well, I think the statement could be made without bravado.
Okay.
All right, that's all. Whoever else wants that. Thank you.
But good question, though. It's a good question. I can talk more about the hypostatic union, what it means, and things like that. But whatever.
What is your interpretation of the seemingly different accounts of the fates of Judas Iscariot?
You guys are discussing the laws of logic, and a contradiction is one statement that makes another statement impossible, or both statements cannot be both true at the same time in the same sense in the same way. I've actually been to Jerusalem, and I've seen the hillside where he hung himself, and it's really interesting. It's just there are trees literally at the top of them at the hillside, and he would have just hung himself, and the tree limb broke or the rope broke, whatever, and he gushed down and broke his balls gushed out. There's no contradiction.
Yeah, Gus, that one's easy. I can run that one pretty well.
Yeah, that's easy.
Well, I'm not running anything. I mean, I've never spoken at length to Matt. I've watched him for years. Not to talk about you.
Are you a stalker?
Not to talk about you like you're not in the room, but I mean,
I'm just kidding,
I've watched the Reverend for years. The very first time I saw you, Reverend, you were talking to a fellow. I wish I could remember his name, but you were in his home, and you were talking to a fellow. He had a red beard, red hair, and you were discussing whether or not baptism was necessary. You were discussing whether or not baptism was necessary or not necessary for salvation.
Right.
You were talking to a fellow. He had a red beard, and he was a bit of a portly fellow, not overweight per se, but portly. And you were on black. You were both on black furniture.
Yeah, and I had a casual T-shirt on because I didn't know we were going to be filming it. I feel bad about that. Yeah, that was Keenan.
You tell him a reverend. Are you actually a reverend?
Yeah, I am. I prefer to be called Matt. Matt's fine. I'm an ordained minister, ex-pastor, so whatever.
Oh, I mean,
doesn't mention it much, but he actually knows a tons of theology about is Jehovah's Witnesses.
Yeah, I do. I know about them too.
What do you think of? There's a big fellow. I wish I could remember his name. He's a big lion of a man, huge mane of golden hair, and I better not talk about him. No, because I remember something now. Okay, never mind. Moving on.
What the fuck?
No, it's just there's another there's another guy who goes after Jehovah's Witnesses, and he's a big fellow, big big lion's mane of a man, and he runs a program I think called The Heart of the Matter. And
No, he's whacked. He doesn't have all his paws in the litter box. Oh crap, what's his name? I've debated him many times. Oh, I hate that. I'm bad with names. Crap. Oh, I can't believe I can't remember his name. What a doofus.
What?
Okay.
I'm a doofus. I can't remember his stinking name. It's ridiculous.
I can't either. I think
Golly.
the problem is I think his name is Matt as well.
No, it's not.
there's
No
some
one
or
would.
other.
No one that dumb could misuse a name as good as Matt.
I love this guy.
Dude, you'd be surprised.
The Heart of the Matter with Sean something.
Yeah, Sean something or other. Sean. You've
that's killing me.
crossed swords with him a half a dozen times. How could you?
I know. Man, I cannot believe it. That is so lame. Gosh.
Hey, Slick, have you ever talked to Leighton Flowers?
Oh yeah, I've debated him. Okay,
You've
come
debated
on.
him? Like,
yeah.
recorded?
Sean McCraney.
Sean McCraney. Yes.
Okay, now I can sleep tonight.
Yes.
Thanks. Gosh, what a moron.
Yes, but I mean, you gotta respect the fact that he goes toe to toe with the Jehovah's. You gotta respect his
that's not a big
tenacity
deal.
at least.
That's not a big deal. I mean, he's going off the deep end. He's now wants to rewrite the Bible and some other things to knock certain essential doctrine. So basically, we would say that that's right. You guys don't know this theological term. I have to teach people theology a lot, especially unbelievers. There's this theological term called whacked, and that's what he is.
Oh, is that there in the second book of Genesis? Is that?
No, it's in First Moronicles.
Oh, the first of Moronicles.
Yeah, First Moronicles, or as some like to say,
Nice.
there's another apocryphal book called Second Testicles, but we don't like that book.
Great.
Did I just hear you say that?
Yeah, you did. Yeah, you did. That's right. I don't say it very often, but hey, come on, I'm a normal guy.
Isn't the only problem third testicles? Not second. I thought second was normal.
That would be the real problem. Sorry.
That's a seriously apocryphal book. That would not have made it past the Council of Nicaea.
I'm sorry, Vince. It's so stupid. It's funny. I tell my friends about it. That's a good one. Wouldn't the real problem be with the third testicles? That's awesome. That is awesome. I wish I'd have thought of that.
Many popes would disagree. Not going in there. No.
That is clever. Oh man.
You know what? While I still have you, Matt, or Mr. Slick, whatever.
Yeah, Matt's fine. Or Great One, but Matt's good.
Great One. All right, easy now.
Thoughts on the representation of Lucifer and Job? Because I've read a lot of papers that seem to imply that Satan or the devil as we know it isn't in Job.
The Satan. Say it again. What?
Say that again.
What? That Lucifer isn't the devil in Job. It's just an angel of God.
Lucifer is a fallen angel of God.
But it isn't specifically talking about him in.
Well, the book of Job, incidentally, is one of the oldest books in existence. For real, it really is quite old. But it has an older style of Hebrew in it as well. And I think that I know somebody who made this observation. I think it's got some merit to it, that there are the four antagonists, so to speak, represent schools of philosophy, and it's really an interesting idea. But nevertheless, no, it's canonical, and so it really is an issue of Lucifer being a fallen angel, the devil, and coming and trying to whine and complain and all that kind of stuff.
Well, it works better with my Calvinism when I say that it's not actually Lucifer; it's just an angel of God. Like God is straight up decreeing that Job suffer so that that God can show His own glory to Job.
Yeah, so you're a Calvinist, huh?
3.5 points, right?
then you wouldn't be a Calvinist.
Limited atonement. Still trying to figure that out.
That's easy.
Okay, sure.
You know what, Reverend Slick? I'm just going to come out and say this. You Calvinists make God out to be.
About to be what?
You really make God out to be mean.
Nah, actually, if you understand what Calvinism teaches, then you go, oh, it really is loving. Oh.
Really? What about all those people that God made specifically for ill use?
What do you mean ill use?
Well,
No
it comes from the whole notion of now. I'm nowhere near the Bible scholar you are, so take it easy on me.
I'm not a Bible scholar. I'm just a
Yes, you are.
guy who
Stop.
studies.
Study the Bible. Stop it. Where was I? The phrase where God says, "Have I made not? Can a potter not fashion one creation for ill use, and another for? And have I not loved this one and hated that one?"
Romans
In
9, 9
terms
to
of
23. Yeah.
okay, so I mean, is why? And I just know what you're going to tell me too. Why would God create some people with the knowledge He has? Why would God create some people that He would choose not to
Save.
choose specifically not to save?
You know, this is really interesting because my middle daughter literally, an hour ago, asked the exact same question. I mean, not exactly those words, but it was the same question.
Well, I'll accept
And
the answer, but you don't need the juice box.
if I understood what that meant, I'd come back with a crushing, intelligent reply.
No, but like sometimes, like with kids, you sort of talk to them and you give them a juice box when they're.
Oh, no,
Yeah,
I just
little
gave her
snack.
I gave her a good theological thing. What I said to her, which I think is apropos here as well, is that there's two main issues. And the first one is the issue of pride and arrogance. When I say that, I don't mean to accuse anybody other than to say we're all normal in the sense that we all have pride and arrogance within us because we tend to be the ones who want to judge. And so when we ask the question, why would God do ABC? What we're then asserting, if we're having a moral issue with it, and not just a curiosity to be satisfied in an intellectual sense, but if we're saying, why would God do that? Because I don't really like it. You know, is there something wrong with it? Then what that is the admission that the person themselves is trying to play that position of God and tell God how he ought to be. That's a first problem because there's only two ways to even broach the question to begin with. That's with one's personal subjectivity, which doesn't amount to anything, or the other is to appeal to an outside objective standard. But then again, we'd presuppose God for that, and that's a lot we could unpack. So either way, the person who asked the question is shooting themselves in the foot. But nevertheless, when we tackle the question, why would God do that? It's not just simply why would he make people that he know are going to go to hell, and why would he make people for the purpose of destruction? Because he does say he does that in Romans 9, 22 and 23, as well as Proverbs 16, 4. Why would God do that? Well, the simple answer is because he decided to. Now, I could expand on some things and go into more theology, but it would take a few more minutes. If you guys want me to, I will, but if you don't, I won't. I don't waste your time.
Saying that, like, getting him out of the moral quandary by just saying he has authority could easily be done with like Hitler or any despot. It's not really an argument. It's just a fancy way of just being like, well, he doesn't meet a really good standard, or I hold him to a lower standard than I would my fellow man, and I'm just going to give him a pass.
Reverend, you can ignore
The problem, can I address that though? See, that's a category mistake you just made. Categories like how valuable is the Mona Lisa painting? Well, let me get my bathroom scale and I'll weigh it and I'll figure it out. And that's obviously a wrong category because aesthetic value is not the same thing determined by weight. So when you talk about this issue of
that analogy doesn't apply. I mean, you're basically just restating this like an authority thing.
Oh, okay, gotcha.
Saying that that it's a category issue is just restating that, he's in another category because he's an authority above us. You're just making the same mistake that I just outlined.
No, God is by definition the omniscient, omnipotent creator of the universe. Hitler is not. So there are different categories that you are raising up in order to draw a common comparison between them. And so if you're going to say, you say like,
hey, do you reject Outbound? Do you reject dualism on principle, Outbound?
You can arbitrarily
Outbound, do you reject dualism on principle?
You can arbitrarily decide.
Outbound, do you reject dualism on principle?
To put Hitler in
Outbound, do you reject dualism on principle?
I don't accept his authority. That's really all that's saying. I accept God's authority, but I don't accept Hitler's, so I'm categorizing them differently.
Outbound, do you reject dualism on principle?
The choice to categorize them differently is the choice to say, I'm not going to hold God to this standard. You're basically giving him a pass by choosing to put him in that category.
I understand what you're saying, but there's another
Just
problem.
a fancy way of saying, like, well, I'm going to let him be a dick.
I understand what you're saying, but you don't realize the quandary that you're putting yourself in. You're saying that God has a certain standard you must adhere to.
I'm not putting myself in a quandary.
No, let him finish, Outbound. Let him finish.
You're saying that God must God must abide by a certain standard that you seem to have information about it, and you're privy to it.
Yeah.
But that's the problem, is that you don't have a standard by which you can raise anything against God.
Yes, I do.
No, you have a subjective opinion, and
that's what
no
God
disrespect
has.
No disrespect meant to your subjective opinion. You're certainly entitled to it, but your subjective opinion has no basis for actual moral debate and measurement or standards by which you can judge God.
Actually, it does. I mean, there's any subjective opinion can make claims about morals.
Do you realize that subjectivity is itself self-refuting?
How so?
No, it's not.
Yes, it is. Let me explain. Subjectivity deals with the issue of truth, but subjectivity deals with what you personally believe is your opinion about what something is true. But if it's subjective about what you think is true, you don't know if it actually is true because it's just your opinion about something. Therefore, subjective ideologies in this regard is self-refuting because you could never know whether or not your subjective opinion is actually true or not.
Yeah, you can know it. When you're talking about something that's subjective, it is true by definition. It's like saying, I like bacon. Of course it's true.
No, you didn't hear what I said. I said objective truth. I said objective. You're not listening.
Well,
I've had this conversation many times with people before, and I will use the word objective versus subjective. So it has to do with subjective
morals don't
things
fall in that
versus
realm. They're not objective.
Yeah, morals have to be objective in order to have universal
They can't
standards
be objective.
by which you can. Yes, they can be.
They can't.
Actually, Matt, I think human morality, human morality is one of those tricky things. Since generally speaking, we don't develop our own morality; it's received from others. Why can't I hit my little brother in the head and take his candy? Mom says, because you don't do that. Why? Because it's not right, because he's your little brother, because you're supposed to take care of him. In comes the morality. And one of the things that's really interesting is that morality, I think, because no single human can change the entirety of what a society's morality is. It happens extremely rarely. And generally speaking, no single human can do that. For all intents and purposes, the human morality in that sense presents itself as objective.
No, it's not.
Because yes,
define
it does.
Objective
It presents
morality.
it presents
define
it.
what it means.
I'm talking, Reverend. I'm talking about functionally objective rather than literally objective, which realistically speaking, in pragmatic terms, is not distinguishable from the.
A functional ideology is based upon a principle. So, upon what principle do you then state that a moral can be objective?
What I'm saying to you is that if a whole bunch of people cling to a moral code, okay, that because a single person cannot then change what that moral code is and cannot enforce their moral code against that moral code. That's why we have police, for instance. Then what happens is that the moral code becomes functionally objective.
I got you. You're just repeating yourself, and I asked a question.
Well, it's okay.
Upon which principle do you base an objective moral? But then what you did was you posited something, a logical fallacy called argumentum ad populum. The majority holds to a certain something, so therefore it's true.
Well,
that's an invalid argument.
That may be an invalid argument, but it's actually a practice.
He didn't even say it was true. He just said it was functionally objective, which is.
I got you. I understood that, and I responded to that by saying that a functionally objective thing is based upon a principle. So I understood what he said, and I asked another question based upon what he was. Then he went into the issue of argumentum ad populum. I then identified argumentum ad populum as being something that is logically not correct. It's not a good basis upon which to base anything.
Well, okay. First of all, I understand. Let me go back and actually answer your question, because you're right. I didn't answer your question, and one of the things I'm deathly afraid is I'm going to get jumped in here. But so I'm sort of afraid to take my time and lay anything out. But you see, to me, modern morality is something that has been, and here's that nasty word again, evolving over time. Our basic web of morality went back to when we were hunter-gatherers. Basic notions that were tied essentially to survival. And so those traits that groups of us and ensconced within our societies going forward were the ones that were more amenable to our survival. And so those ones they became sort of a grass floor on the hut of our morality. As time went on and life became more complicated, and more complex concepts came about, then we began tackling those cognitively, and we sort of settled on something. Now, granted, there are fluctuations in basic morality across the planet, but generally speaking, by and large, usually, it's not nice to hit somebody and take their stuff. It's not nice to hurt them. It's not nice to burn somebody's house down, etc., etc., etc. I don't think that the so-called subjectivity that you speak about is all that dangerous, because generally speaking, there's a lot less lawlessness than anybody might guess if left to our own devices.
Well, first of all, you just made an argument fallaciously, beg the question, and you assume certain evolutionary principles, and then you based a morality upon evolution, and evolution doesn't produce morality. Morality is an abstraction. No, it doesn't. Evolution produces survivability.
Yes, but in order to survive, we had to have certain morality. Yes, we did. Look at the tribe. The tribe that had a bad habit of
Let me explain why.
Group cooperation,
Reverend Slick, the
evolutionarily beneficial.
Reverend Slick, the tribe that had a bad habit of killing each other every time there was a fight was a tribe that didn't survive.
Okay, you're not letting me finish what I'm trying to say to you, and you don't realize that you're making a lot of mistakes in your thinking. And I'm trying to identify them for you. Begging the question.
Well, periodically, you're not understanding me as well, and I reserve the right to correct that.
Matt Slick, may I try to help you
out? Well, maybe
I'll
go find another server where I can actually have a conversation.
You can have a
why should I? I mean,
having a conversation.
Guys,
well, an organic conversation.
Go somewhere that's one-sided.
Hang on. Matt Slick is absolutely right on this, guys.
Come on.
Joel, you're about to get kicked out. Hey, okay, you guys
I'm
should be a
gonna
little
take my blow and go home.
You guys should be a little bit more kind to our guest, Matt Slick. Okay, and at least if he's trying to have a conversation, don't pile onto him. It's like try to. We're honored for him to be here and talk with us.
Get his dick out of your mouth.
I was gonna defend him, Shamos. He was fucking right, and I was gonna try to help him out.
Could I? Yeah, absolutely. Then defend him, but let's just take turns. Absolutely defend him. Go ahead.
Could I ask a question? Could I ask a question?
You just did.
Oh, to be objective, value judgments would have to come from the object being valued. So how is it possible for values to come from objects?
Values don't come from objects. Value is an abstraction.
Yes, but to be objective, that would have to be, because that's what it means for something to be objective.
To be objective
means what it means to be objective. The value judgment would have to come from the object being valued.
No, I
That's
beg
what
to.
The word means. That's what
I
the
beg
word
to differ.
Means.
The object is not the thing that has value inherent in it. Value is it's an abstraction. It's kind of like an emotion, kind of like it's a judgment. It's an assessment, and this requires.
Therefore, it's subjective.
It requires cognition to do this.
You just proved that all morality is subjective.
Okay, well, yeah, okay.
I agree.
Yeah, I'm just trying
to... You just proved that all morality is subjective because you said it comes from subjects.
If I can't complete my sentences, you can't come in and say I proved anything.
Yeah, let him just finish and then you can respond, Brendan.
You guys, look, I'm halfway through making a point. You jump in and you say something that I said I didn't say.
Yeah, you kind of did.
Well, hold on. At least let the man explain himself. I mean,
let me explain myself. It's just polite. I'll let you guys do the same thing.
think they're just a bit excited.
Well,
Tad.
if they're excited, they need to calm down and let me finish my thoughts. That's
Part of
all.
the conversation is the right to object if I believe that the person does not understand me correctly. And Reverend, you would do the same thing if you were in my place.
Yeah, but let you at least finish.
No, you would. I have seen you interrupt other people if you think they've got something wrong right off the bat. And so
come on.
I claim that right.
Carry on with the argument. Let's
Okay,
skip
well,
the
fair enough.
fucking
Fair
debate.
enough. Let's reserve that for everyone. Reserves that right. Let's just reserve it for every now and then type occasion. So Brenda said something to Matt Slick. Okay, no problem. Brenda said something to Matt Slick. Let him respond fully to her until he's finished, and then Brenda can respond back, or Gus can get in, or whatever.
Somebody said that a value is based on the object or the object. No, that's not correct. Value is on the person who observes the object and assigns to beg the question, so to speak, a value upon an object. So I might have a book on theology that I value greatly, and any one of you in the room here might say you have no value in that object. The object itself doesn't have the inherent value, since value itself is an abstraction that requires assessment and a bit of subjectivity within it. That's what the difference is. That's all the point I was trying to make.
Yes, I understand. The point is that that's subjective valuing. And so when we make moral claims, we're making a subjective moral
Yeah, I
claim.
mean, you just refuted your whole fucking stance with that.
Yeah, you did.
Who's the you?
Matt.
You refuted
Me? No,
your
I
own
have
claim
not.
that
No, I have
morality
not.
is objective. Because
No, you didn't understand what I'm saying. Let me clarify.
Only subjects can value.
If there's 10 of us in a room and we see an object on a table, and one person in the room does something to the object, is it a moral issue?
It depends on who you ask.
No, I don't think so.
What if?
It could be.
It could be.
It depends who you ask.
Depend on the subjects.
What if I owned that object and we're all in the room and I said, this is a very valuable object to me. My wife gave it to me and it means a great deal to me. And one of you guys just went over and just laughed and smashed it, would that be an offense? Would that be wrong? Would that be morally wrong?
Yeah.
Of course.
Yeah.
Okay. Why?
Because it belongs to you. Because back in the day, one of the things that we discovered is that the tribe are harmonious when people respect each other's properties. And so in order for us to survive, we learn to respect each other's property because a harmonious tribe is a tribe that survives.
Yeah, that's making mistakes in logic. There's a problem in the issue of morality, the is-ought barrier. Are you guys familiar with it?
Yes. It's like philosophy.
Good.
There is no barrier by the way.
Yes, there is.
There is no barrier.
Let him finish.
There is an is-ought barrier. Why is it that I own that object? Let's just say it's a really nice vase, okay? And someone destroys that object. Why is it that it's a moral issue that we would all agree is a moral issue? And so someone says because ancient times survivability meant we respected property, that's not a reason for the ought. It's a statement of is. People liked it. People agreed. But agreement doesn't make something moral. It just makes an agreement.
In that particular case, the ought turned into an is. See, that's the thing about our morality. Our morality solidifies and will desolidify depending on who's Jesus Christ in me? Who's got the problem?
I think it was Brenda, Gus.
I have a problem too, though. To be honest.
All right. Well, go ahead. Say something then. Since you're so so dead set against my response, say Jesus Christ can talk. Go ahead, Brenda.
No, that was for you.
Who was the one scoffing on the mic? I thought it was Brenda. Was it you, Wolf? Did you want to speak? Because normally people that scoff.
That was obviously Brenda, but I was just asking Gus how does he know that was for him specifically?
Well, I don't know. I'm just,
When you're speaking and someone scoffs in the middle of what you're saying, it seems to be a scoff as a response to what you're saying. That's pretty fucking
whatever. Whatever, but Gus did fucking say that an odd can turn to an is.
Yeah.
Yeah, but he can't
Let him
justify
explain
the
himself.
logical
Let him explain what he
necessity.
means by that, guys.
You can.
I don't understand if there's a division between is and ought, then you can't make any claims about objective morality, because that's the whole point. Morality is about what ought to be, and objectivity is about what is. And if there is a division between what is and what ought to be, then you can't have objective morality.
There
You just disproved your
that's
own
right.
morality again, the second time.
Then, I'm not done yet. I'm setting you guys up.
Oh, okay.
It sounds like you're setting yourself up.
So what you're saying then is on your basis and your worldview and the ramifications of it, there can be no objective moral absolute.
Yeah.
Yeah, we don't need one.
Now, would you agree that statements are either true or false? Called the law of excluded middle, third law of classical logic.
Yeah, but in science, there's the Schrodinger's cat thing.
Okay, and that has to do with quantum physics, not with statements. So is a statement true or false? 2 + 2 is 4. Or, hey, look at my cat, which I am right now.
Propositions are
All right.
either true or
So
false.
I'm going to propose a statement. Tell me if the statement is true or false. It is always morally wrong for anyone to torture babies to death merely for one's personal pleasure. Let me say it again.
That's
true. It is always, which requires.
That's not true. It's not a true statement.
I mean, the answer to that question depends who you ask.
Well, I think it's true. I think that statement's the most obviously true thing you could ever say.
Probably, yeah, absolutely. I agree with Seamus.
You're a moral realist. We're not.
If you say that the statement's true, then you have a moral absolute, and that refutes what you guys said that I set myself up for. However, if you say it's not true, then you're saying there are instances when it's morally acceptable and proper and good to rape a baby to death merely for one's personal pleasure.
But
yeah.
Mr.
Okay, well, like
Slick, wouldn't you
Gus
agree?
here,
Wait, hang
Gus
on.
here might say,
oh my fucking god.
There are probably individuals who exist that would take joy out of torturing a baby. I'm almost
always,
sure.
How about this?
Always wrong for everyone.
Listen,
you forgot the universality statement.
No, you know what? You fucking listen, man. That was a fucking loaded question, because if you answer yes or no to that question, that commits you to moral realism.
No,
which,
it doesn't.
I know for a fact that Brenda and I are not moral realists.
It's a set-up question, atheist.
You're making a
Atheists
huge
can't handle.
mistake.
It's like saying
You're making a massive mistake.
it's like saying, is it true or false that bacon always tastes good?
What Maslick is doing
I want to hear Seamus on this. I want to hear
One at a
Seamus
time,
on this.
please.
What
One at
Maslick
a
is
time,
doing is an
You
appeal
guys
to emotion fallacy.
fumbling. I'm gonna throw
I
you
want
the
to hear
bone.
I'm
Seamus
not
on
fumbling
this.
at all. He's making
Listen
an
to
appeal
me.
to
It
emotion
doesn't-
fallacy.
Yeah,
No, it's not.
It's an
his own-
It's not an
fallacy.
appeal. Even I can. Listen, I know
Listen.
nothing about philosophy, and even I can see that's not an appeal to emotion fallacy.
Of course
Listen
it
for a
is.
second. Listen to me for a second. It does not presuppose absolutum or objectivity, because Gus might argue that, yeah, it's wrong for anyone and everyone to do that, but what bounds that is his preference, not an objective fact of the world. Okay, so it doesn't presuppose universalism. It doesn't presuppose objectivism, and anyone that thinks so is silly. So you guys were on the wrong track. Gus could clearly say, of course that's true. It's true that anyone that does that, it's wrong for anyone at all times, universally. And what grounds that statement is my own personal preference, and that is not an objective thing.
What if the universe
There's a
has
problem.
mind?
There's a problem. There's a problem. If you have a worldview that's atheistic, okay, where there is no universal transcendent mind, then what you're saying is, if it's your opinion that the statement is true, and only your personal opinion, then you're saying it's your personal opinion that there's a universal moral absolute, which you can't have and justify inside of your atheistic worldview. So that would be a self-contradiction.
Why not?
No,
Why can't I?
We're not saying
Wait,
it's
no. I want to know why. Wait, why? Why can't I?
Because a universal moral absolute is not dependent upon a person's subjective preference.
We're not just talking about my subjective preference.
If any individual, like an atheist, an atheist who denies the universality of God's existence and says, yes, I believe the statement is true, that it is always wrong for everyone, which is a universal moral absolute, always wrong for everyone to torture babies to death merely for their personal pleasure. And then the atheist says, but Matt, it's only my personal opinion, it's not objective. Well, then I would say, so your personal opinion is that there is a universal objective truth, because you're saying the statement is true, that's always wrong for everyone. You can't hold to that inside of your own worldview.
The trap is beautiful. The trap is beautiful, and you've laid it out beautifully. But here's the thing.
Barker fell
here's
into
how
it
I would
when I
answer
debated
you.
him in Portland.
You're just asserting
He sure did. He sure did. But here's how I would respond to that again. Okay.
Please.
The reason that most humans would find that proposition an absolute no is because we learn that children are the key to survival. And if you don't look after children, and that goes all the way to torturing. Okay, and that's one of the first lessons that we learned. We actually learned other lessons. We actually learned other lessons about what happens to the human mind and the human mental health in the process of torture. Okay, but I can go into that at some other time. Okay, so this is again, this breaks down to a question of what allowed us to survive.
That does not justify the universality of absolute, which is by definition a universally true abstraction.
Well,
see, a universally true abstraction is something like it is always wrong for everyone to blah blah blah.
Matt,
and it's an abstraction because it occurs in the mind. If you're going to say it's evolutionarily, it's not an evolution. It's no, it's an abstraction because it's a conveyance of thought that I can convey to you, and you recognize the universality of the moral truth.
You asked the question.
Moral statements are abstractions.
You asked the question: is a statement always have to be true or false? And that was your first mistake, because they don't always have to be true or false. If that's true, then if I say bacon always tastes good, is that true or false? Like it depends who you ask. It can be true, it can be false. It's not something that's universal.
Yeah, but
but the problem with that is it's inherently subjective in the questioning, so therefore it's
morality. That's the
morality.
Problem. When you talk about torturing babies, it's also subjective. It just happens to be that the majority of the population subjectively.
Let's work with this.
And that subjectivity has calcified itself into something that behaves like objectivity.
And it's based on facts as well.
Let me show you the bacon thing. It's always the case that everyone everywhere thinks and believes that bacon tastes good. Statement true or false?
Yeah, when you add that, it's false. But why? How come you didn't?
Hold on 1 sec. When I add that, I'm properly representing the question and the issue, because you were not.
Yeah, but you didn't do that. You didn't do the same thing with the baby thing. You didn't say, "Does?"
Yes, I did.
No, you didn't.
Always. The statement is.
I'm not finished. Hold on. You didn't do that. With the bacon thing, you said, does everyone think this? With the baby thing, you said, is it wrong for everyone? You didn't say, what do they think? There's a big difference between those two things.
Yeah, yes, there is. There's a huge difference. And whether or not someone believes something's morally right or wrong doesn't change whether or not it actually is morally right or wrong. That's another problem in your statement.
You have to show that.
There is no actually is. Yeah, there's nothing else.
Go one at a time, please.
There is no actually is right or wrong.
So what is your first name? What's your? There actually is no absolutely right and wrong, which is a moral statement, which is self-refuting. You guys, commit logic errors. Yes, it is. When the topic is morality itself, you're making a universal judgment on a moral basis by saying there is or is not a moral thing. That is a morally based statement.
You're making a logic error.
He made an existential claim. He made a claim about what is, not what ought to be.
So he's trying to make sure that what the is a moral actuality, or not?
No, that's what you're trying to do, and I'm saying you can't.
I'm saying you can. And the only way to do that is to justify it by presupposing that God exists. And when you do that, you can have a moral absolute, and then we can all rightfully say, yes, it is always wrong for
The only way you can do that is by
torture
some
babies.
fantasy bullshit you pulled out of your ass.
Well, you know what? I'll tell you what. If you want to talk like a grown-up without using pejoratives, then we'll continue our conversation. I have been addressing you politely. I've been addressing you logically. And if you're not going to participate in that, please tell me why I should continue to have a conversation with you.
Boy, how condescending was that question?
It was meant to reflect the insult that you just gave to me, and I'm trying to be polite to you, and you keep pushing. So I'm just asking you, why should I continue to have a conversation with someone who is so insulting? Please answer the question.
Outbound, could you please just be respectful and try to have the conversation?
You know, I'm only going to do it because he, like, you know, it is so valuable to have somebody like Matt in the room, because he runs off so easily.
You know what? Matt's actually being nice and polite, man.
Wow, I'm trying to be as nice and polite as, and already the guy's saying he runs off. Whatever. I spend hours with people all the time. And by the way, guys, I got to tell you this. My wife is recovering from some very serious medical problems, and I tell them now that if I had to suddenly say, look, I got to go take care of my wife, I have to go take care of my wife. She has a very, very, very rare connective tissue disorder. She's using a walker right now to get around. She's having to take painkillers to survive. She's fighting depression. She had open heart surgery in March. She had another surgery in August. She has bone density problems that are worse than a 100-year-old woman. She's got allergy to wheat. She is in bad shape. And the fact that I'm up here talking
She is married to Matt Slick.
I'm sorry.
That makes it even worse. That makes it even worse.
I'm sorry to hear that,
So
Matt.
I'm just telling you, if I say to you, look, guys, I got to go take care of my wife, don't say, oh, he's running. Just please don't do that, okay?
Reverend, there's always going to be some asshole that says you're running. The best thing to do is just ignore them. Most of us here know that you're for real, so don't worry about it.
All right, thank you. And call me Matt. Reverend sounds so weird, but
well,
if you want. But yeah.
I mean, yeah. Well, there's a reason.
Matt, when you debate atheists on the internet, how much of it is motivated by like hoping to convert them, and how much of it is motivated by just an entertaining hobby?
I couldn't understand. What were the two options?
She asked you if you're motivated to convert. Motivated to convert, or just to.
Well, I assume it's both.
To convert, or what's the other one?
It's just like an entertaining hobby.
Oh, there's both of those in there. Absolutely. I like to go into atheist rooms and test things and ideas. And on the other hand, I want everybody to convert to Christ. So exactly what proportion, I couldn't tell you. And sometimes I will say that sometimes my motives aren't that good. Sometimes my ego and pride get in the way, and I have to repent. You know, it's what it is sometimes.
It's ironic, though. I mean, you're here to deliver the message, right? But don't you think in a room full of atheists, we've kind of heard the message?
Yeah, you have. But you know what? I know that God is good and God is powerful, and he saved this agnostic occultist out of all of it by a very dramatic reality of his encounter. And I know he can do that with you. And you know, you guys, I don't hate any of you, and I'm not trying to disrespect any of you. And like a lot of Christians, they'd be offended by you and, you know, challenged or afraid. I'm not none of that. I will say that sometimes I use atheists to backdrop and sound out some of my arguments to improve so I can teach on the radio and write books. And, you know, I'll tell people that because I'm honest. But my goal for all of you is to find salvation in Jesus Christ. You need him because judgment's coming. Righteousness is
Oh my God,
issue.
I'm feeling something in my chest.
Well, you know,
sorry.
Just hit your chest and get it out of your system. But you know, mockery is something that I understand that atheists often do that because they have all kinds of issues. And hopefully, if God were to condescend to use such a person like me to be able to maybe shed light on it, at the very least, it brings glory to him, even if you all reject it.
Matt, I don't think it's specific to atheists because I'm one and I'm not doing that. And I really mean that, my thoughts are with you. No prayers.
Oh, thank you. Well, atheists, Muslims, Roman Catholics, Mormons, Jehovah's Witnesses, they're, you know, I try and tackle them all. And my motives are never pure.
I love watching you play with Mormons, by the way. I love watching you play with Mormons. I seen those 2 YouTube videos where you were. Now the only problem with those videos, there was so much wind in the microphone, it was crazy.
Yeah.
But you were talking to those. I think it was in like a fairground or something, and you were talking.
Oh,
to those,
yeah.
You were talking to those Mormons, and they were just like, "Rah!"
Well, Mormonism.
What's your motivation, Matt? Is it to bring him in line with your theist beliefs?
No. No. To bring it to Jesus.
Oh, Matt, when I said you actually don't talk about it a lot, but you know a lot of theology about Jehovah's Witnesses, was I mistaken? Was it Mormons instead, rather?
No, I know Jehovah's Witness theology, and I can deal with them. And Oneness Pentecostal, I can deal with evolution, atheism, some philosophy, Islam, occult stuff, UFO stuff. I love all that. I love studying everything. It's fun. It's a blast for me.
Is your reason for bringing them closer to Jesus for their own sake, or for you to not win points, but help yourself?
I think there's a little bit of both of that. I think there's impure motives in every single thing I do, but the goal is to do it so that Christ, first of all, is glorified, and second, that you, gentlemen, ladies and gentlemen, would find forgiveness in Him. The judgment's coming. I don't want any of you to be punished for what you deserve. I want you to find salvation.
Yeah, we don't believe that the Christian Bible is true, or that it represents.
Why do I deserve it?
Or that represents what?
I believe the Bible's true.
Well, the
I
Bible
will
has some
keep
unique
stealing
features
from
that no
Walmart.
other
That's
piece of literature has.
So good.
That is very true.
And by judgment, I guess you mean our own mortality and the fact we're all going to die, not that there's some biblical apocalypse nearing.
No, eternal damnation and conscious torment and fire forever.
Yeah, that's nice.
$1,000 fine for a $50 crime.
But it's not much of a threat. It's not much of a threat if you don't believe in those things.
I know you don't believe it. You can stand on railroad tracks and a train's coming. It doesn't mean it's not true. But you see, if I were to give you evidence,
railroad tracks and the train hits me, I can know that it's actually true, but it's not.
Yeah, but
it's
you
not
see,
the case for the other.
well,
I
what do you
love
want for
some
evidence?
preachers that don't shy away from like the fire and brimstone type teaching, because like I remember one preacher once told me, like, sometimes when somebody's like on the road to like ruin, you got to shake them out of it in a really hard way, you know?
Yeah,
So sometimes
I was a Baptist. I know how that goes.
I'm just saying sometimes.
Look, can I tell you guys some unique aspects of, if you want? I'm not going to try to bore you guys, but I can tell you some things about the Bible that is just not possible by human reasoning.
Okay, sure.
You guys ready?
Let me get my thing settled in here. Okay, go ahead.
Okay, you got your brain ready, right?
Gotcha.
All right. There are 4 Gospels, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. In the Old Testament, the 12 tribes of Israel camped around the tabernacle in 4 groups of 3. Easily verifiable. You can go read it. Why 4 groups of 3? Well, not really sure, except that each of the 4 groups had a flag or a banner that represented them: a lion, an ox, an eagle, and a man. In Ezekiel, there's a 4-faced creature: lion, ox, eagle, and man. In Revelation, there's a 4-faced creature: the lion, the ox, the eagle, and the man. And the 4 Gospels were known in code in the early days as the lion, the ox, the eagle, and the man. Okay, well, that's no big deal. What is interesting is that the tabernacle in the wilderness has more written about it than any other topic of the entire Bible. I mean, it is monotonous in its detail. How high you build something, what the wood's to be like, what the fabrics, because of pages and pages and pages. I mean, it's hard to get through, and it really is.
Skyrim raw.
Now, the thing is, those 4 groups have numbers of men. When you take those numbers of men and you just stand them up and you put them next to the tabernacle, and then they just, you just put them in rows, and you move them out so that you feel how many people are in each one. What's interesting is you get a cross. It's a cross that's formed by the number of people up to north, east, west, and south of that tabernacle. And you go, okay, that's kind of interesting. But it doesn't prove anything, but it's interesting. And so, as you look at those four Gospels, here's something that's even more interesting. The four Gospels are written over 20 to 60 year period from each other. Those four Gospels, the last one written is the Gospel of John. And in the Gospel of John, in chapter 21, it says that Jesus said to the disciples, cast your net on the right side, and then they did, and they caught fish, 153 fish. Why 153?
That's really impressive, Matt. That's really impressive.
Yeah, thanks for the mockery. And so 153 fish are there. Now, why 153? Now, if you were to look at the four Gospels, and you were to remove the 4,000 that were fed, the 5,000 that were fed, how many individuals in the four Gospels received a blessing from Jesus personally? 153.
Shit,
well,
man.
that's really interesting, because how do you calculate and put all of those together and make it fit just like that? Well, that's interesting. It doesn't prove anything, but it's like one brick in a wall. You go, okay, that's a bit of an unusual brick. It's an unusual thing. But I'd like to say, but wait, there's more. And so, as you guys are familiar with, there's certain aspects.
The probabilistic argument for God?
Well, there is probabilistic arguments, and I love mathematical probabilism, but and permutations and probability and universal probability bound and things like that. But what you guys probably don't know is that mathematics has been done on the prophecies of Christ, and you guys are probably be bored with that. Let me give you something more interesting. There's a concept in Scripture, the Old Testament and New Testament, called Gematria, and all that means is that the letters are also numbers, so that when you write a word, you're also writing a series of numbers. In English, we have ABC 1, 2, 3. They only have one set of characters that serve both numbers and as letters. So the interesting thing is that when you write any word, it has a gematria, a mathematical value. Okay, not a big deal. Well, they become very, very interesting and statistically impossible. And in Matthew's genealogy of Jesus, in Matthew 1 through 17, I'll just give you this. All of these are divisible by 7. Every single one of these. The number of nouns, the number of the Greek word the, and I can explain why that's an issue in Greek, because the word the has different forms. The number of the forms of the word the is divisible by 7. All these are divisible by 7. The number of Greek words before the time of the deportation, of those 49 words, the number of words that begin with a vowel, the number of words that begin with a consonant, the number of letters, the number of vowels, the number of consonants, the number of words that occur more than once, the number of words that occur only once, the number of nouns, the number of words that are not nouns, the number of nouns that are proper names, the number of male names, the number of times these male names occur, etc. Now, when all of these are put together, you go, okay, well, that's another brick in the wall. How is it that they could actually write something that where every single aspect of the total pericope, a pericope is a section of Scripture, with a pericope here, where every aspect that you examine is divisible by 7.
Matt, is it not possible for a human being to do that in their prose, to plan it out?
I can't say
My
it's
mind is entirely blown, Matt. I think I'm starting to believe.
Would somebody shut that fucking idiot up?
I'm serious. I'm like, I don't know, man.
This guy gets drunk and wanders in here all the time. Shut up.
The thing is I'm not a dumb person. I'm not saying I'm super smart or anything. I try to do something like this for I write a lot, and I couldn't do it, and it becomes extremely difficult. And as soon as you start, I would challenge anybody to try something like this. I mean,
but is it not feasible, Matt, that a human being could do that?
Okay, I'm just saying this. What I'm saying is, I challenge anybody to mimic it and see how difficult it really is, because this is not something that's simply an accident. And it doesn't only occur here, it occurs in other places as well, where these kinds of things.
What exactly are you saying?
That there are the letters are also numbers. And when you look at the numbers in the Bible, these letters, you find some fantastic relationships. Not because you happen to look for them, hey, I'll make anything fit, but because it's just, well, it's improbable. Just as there's a prophecy in Daniel 9, and in Daniel 9, 24 through 28, it talks about a decree to rebuild the walls of Jerusalem. That decree is prophesied in Nehemiah 2, verses 2 through 6. And in Daniel, it talks about an exact length of time that from that decree, the Messiah will come into the city of Jerusalem. And I can give you the details if you want, but it comes up to 173,880 days from the decree from a certain date. And that date is established in history, March 14th, 445 BC. And archaeologists agree and historians agree, yeah, that's what it is, because there's a lot of evidence for it. From the decree from Artaxerxes to rebuild the wall to the time of the Messiah will be, and you go through and you analyze it, 173,880 days, exactly when Jesus came into the temple. How do you do that? How is that? Is that just a coincidence?
Which version of the Bible are we talking about here?
NASB, just what it says. It's just, you can read any version, it's what it says.
Yeah, it's just a coincidence. You're just
Yeah,
looking for things and finding them within
okay.
chaos.
Just looking for them and finding them. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's all it is.
I'm not sure I'd
yes,
attack it from that angle or try and refute from that angle, Brenda. But what I would like to ask Matt, and I don't think he's answered in a way that I'm willing to accept. Is it, if it is feasible for a human being to plan out the prose in the Bible in such a way that it lines up Gematria in that regard? Is that not feasible?
Ludic, on top of that question, of your question, just building on your question, Ludic, the Bible is not a document that was written overnight. I mean, this is
it went through revision.
It's been a living document.
Not revisions.
Or wrong word, I guess.
You know what? Actually, I think it did go through some revision.
No, it's a topic I can talk about. But when you look, you guys, you don't understand how that. You don't say which Bible. That's okay. The Old Testament documents, the New Testament documents, they were written and then they were meticulously copied. And they were copied not like I'm going to give you a letter and copy 100 words and you copy it and like because of the issue of Gematria and how the words are also numbers. Then what they would do when they would copy, because these are sacred documents, there were certain peoples whose jobs it was to make exact copies. And for example, in the Old Testament, when the book of Isaiah, the oldest extant manuscript of the book of Isaiah was 900 AD. When the Dead Sea Scrolls were found, they had another copy of the book of Isaiah discovered, and the Dead Sea Scrolls are written in 100 BC. That's 1,000 years difference. The critics said, we're going to now prove to you that the copying methodology has corruption. And to be honest, there were a few spelling differences and things like that, but the critics just didn't say anything because it was so close to being 100% accurate and identical that they just quiet. They were quiet because the methodology is extremely accurate. When they would do this in the New Testament documents, they would use what's called a codex, and a codex is a page. In the Old Testament, they use scrolls, but a codex is a page. And what they would do is write one letter at a time, and they would write horizontally, and they'd fill up a page. And when they were done with that page, they compared it to the original page. And the original page had mathematical values added to it because each letter is a number. And they would check these things. And if a number did not exactly match, they took the copy and destroyed it. And they started over. This is a very expensive procedure. And we have these copies like this. They have these copies like this, thousands of these copies like this, and the scriptural identification or identical copying methodologies resulted in their accuracy being 99.96% identical in all the copies.
Can I just correct you on two? Well, one's not a correction, but one's a minor correction. I think the Dead Sea Scrolls was in the 1st century AD.
There's been
You
some
said
debate
birth.
on that, but let's just go. We could go with that. But
That doesn't
I'd
mean
heard
that but still, what all
then
I'm
it would
saying,
be
Matt, is that
800
doesn't
years.
mean that those manuscripts don't
Right.
date earlier, right? They can tell,
Right.
but they can probably tell by the wording and stuff that they date earlier. I heard that what they think is that they date definitely into the BC without doubt by critical scholars.
Yeah,
But
it looks like
another
it.
thing
Right.
I was going to say is like what one of the main features, and this is not a correction of something you said. This is an addition. The main feature that typifies a codices is the fact that it's written on both front and back, like verso and recto. That's
And then
what
you
makes
have
it.
then you have things called palimpsests and things like that. But the point I'm trying to make is that when people say the Bible's copied and therefore it's not reliable, they don't understand the issues. I'm not trying to accuse anybody of stupidity. It's just, no, that's just not how it works. We have these copies, and they're all over the Mediterranean area. They were distributed and copied, and very meticulously copied. They've been gathered, and they still find more copies. It's really interesting, written in the original Greek. And when they compare them, they're not close to 100% accurate. And then we translate from that original into our English. That's how it's done.
Yeah, you're just looking for things and finding them. But so what?
Okay.
Well, I mean,
So what are
another
the
thing I'd like
odds?
to kind of correct is that like so it's true that the Jewish scribes, right, were super meticulous.
Yes,
Okay.
they were.
And so there's also a I'm trying to think who they were. They were like a
Essenes.
No, not the Essenes. It's like the 3rd century. They were a 3rd century Jewish group that most of the manuscripts that back to King James are written in. I can't remember what they're the Masoretes, the Masoretic text. So the Masoretes, super meticulous, and they were like 3rd century BC, and so or AD, my bad, AD, the Masoretes, and they copied and were super meticulous. And so, but the Christians, the early Christians, like in the very 1st century, weren't that meticulous, and there's probably reasons for that because like they weren't professional scribes. You know, most of the early Christian copies, probably in the 1st century, were done by untrained scribes. But the goal of
not exactly accurate.
Well, I'm saying the goal of Christians were to disperse the material as quickly as possible, for evangelical reasons and etc. And they were more worried about producing copies for more churches that are coming up than like sitting down and like paying or getting a trained scribe to really bear down on it. But once it hits like the century, like once Constantine and all that shit, they get very very meticulous at that point. That's when you start seeing like the Alexandrian codices and shit like that. What is it called? The you know what I'm talking
I
about? The
understand what
great
you're saying, except that we have manuscripts that are before the Constantine time of 325 AD, and they are identical to the ones after. And so for you to say that they didn't really care, it really is not accurate. There were jobs called amanuensis. These were people whose job it was to write letters. It was a high class skilled job, and they produced these documents and they would copy them and they were disseminated. And this is why all of the Greek manuscripts, or something like 5,600 of them, are 99.6 to 99.8% textually identical, depending on a few variables and how
what I'm saying is like arguably the 1st century Christians weren't able to afford professional scribes, and they were more interested in disseminating the content rather than paying. And also,
not only
another
that,
thing
sorry to
is
interrupt. Not only that,
the
but the
production
1st
of those
century
codices are
Christians.
super expensive. Go ahead.
Not only that, but the 1st century Christians were also being pounded by the Roman regime.
Yes, they were.
And they had to do an awful lot of their worship and their dissemination in the dark.
Right, that's true.
They were writing a lot of it by candlelight.
But also,
they wrote and
there were rich.
Grant the theists their patterns, and then burden them with trying to prove that it couldn't possibly originate from human beings or been planned.
Oh, I haven't finished yet, but I was going to say there were
subject. I'll do that.
There were a lot of rich converts who supplied the costs for the copying all over the Mediterranean area. And the reason this was happening is because Jesus Christ had performed so many miracles and so many things had happened that there were people all over the place. Corinth, in Italy, in Egypt, who are becoming converts all over the place, and many of
That's
them were
just your
quite well off.
supposition. You can't
No,
show
it's
that.
not. No, it's not. I've been studying this.
He's right about that, Brenda. He's
No,
right
it's
that the
just
early.
religious fervor. No, he's not right about that, Seamus.
Well, let's be clear what I mean by he's right about. He's right about the fact that in the like 40s, 50s, and 60s, there were a lot of churches that were being established. The Roman Church was well established in the 50s. The church in Corinth was established. Like First Corinthians and stuff was written in the 50s.
And Ephesus.
That wasn't my dispute, Seamus.
Philippians was written in the early 50s.
It's not my no, it wasn't.
What? That's common, Brenda. Even the secular scholars agree.
When was it written then?
We have
when was
no
it?
text. We have no text from the New Testament that predate anywhere from about 90 to 125 AD.
Really? I want to tackle that statement because I could ask you to prove that or supply some evidence, but I'm not going to waste my time with that one, not to be derogatory. Let me tell you something. The book of Acts is a very significant book. The book of Acts is a history of the early church. The book of Acts includes the death of Stephen, the conversion of Paul, the Jerusalem Council in Acts 15. It includes some incredibly important stuff, the Pentecost. It is a legal document that many think was for the purpose of defending Paul the Apostle out of Acts 17 when he was appealed to Caesar and went to Rome, but that's neither here nor there. The book of Acts does not contain some very significant historical markers, namely 70 AD, the destruction of Jerusalem, which Jesus prophesied in the Gospels. And it does not contain the death of Peter and Paul, which happened roughly, give or take a couple, 3 years, 60 to 65 AD. The book of Acts does not contain those. Why? Because logically, it was written before their death. Now, most scholars
but we're not talking about Acts, Matt. We're talking about the Pauline epistles.
I'm trying to make a point. Since Paul the Apostle died around 62 AD and he wrote those things, then they had to be written before he died, since he wrote them. The book of Acts.
We don't know the authors of any.
Paul didn't write
of
Acts.
the New Testament.
Guys, would you let? Okay, Luke wrote the book of Acts. Luke wrote the book of Luke. Read the first.
Brenda, you're not.
Okay.
Hold on. Let me address Brenda for a
Guys,
second.
can I finish? Can I finish my statements? You say no, it's not true. Yes, it is true. Read the first few verses of Luke and Acts, and you will see the same author was writing on behalf of Theophilus. And you will see it's the case. The book of Acts does not contain the historical markers of the death of Peter and Paul.
Let me back you up here. Hold on for a second. Brenda, some of the things that I'm about to say, everything I'm about to say is actually endorsed by all the secular scholars. This is consensus. Okay? And so first of all, they're almost certain that Paul wrote his stuff in the early 50s, and some of it stretched into the early 60s. And like that's modern scholarly consensus.
Yeah.
Okay.
I'm talking about the synoptic gospels.
Well, he
here's the
wasn't talking
thing.
about the doctors. We're talking about Paul.
Here's the thing about the synoptics. Since Acts was written Luke was written before the book of Acts, and you can verify this by reading the first few verses of each book. The book of Luke was written before the book of Acts. If hypothetically we were to say the book of Acts was written around 60 AD, because it had to be written before the death of Peter and Paul. Let's just say 60 AD is
manuscripts. We have no manuscripts that predate from about 90 AD
let me
to about 125.
let me answer that. Let me answer that. Let me answer it. Let me answer that. Let me answer it.
How about
guys?
How about we let how about we let Matt
How about you
speak
shut up,
all the way
Kathleen?
through?
Yeah, Kathleen,
Well,
he's going to answer. He's
about
going to
this?
answer. We're going to let him answer. Come on.
Yeah, let me answer.
I know a lot about this too. I'd like to answer after Matt.
Okay. Since the book of Acts was written after the book of Luke, Luke was written before Acts. Since Acts does not contain the death markers or the dates of 62 AD roughly of Paul, then we can just for mathematics and simplicity's sake, let's just say it was written around 60 AD. The book of Luke was written before that. Let's just say for math, 55 AD. Matthew and Mark were written before those. And so this is just general consensus. Now, when someone comes to me and says, well, we don't have any actual manuscripts from that time, Well, actually, technically, that's correct. What you do have are copies from roughly 90 AD, and there's some fragments up on through hundreds of years afterwards. And those documents are identical in their copying, and they represent the original. So what's the problem?
Seamus?
Okay, so I just want to correct or one thing. I want to say three things. First of all, Brenda, they do know that Luke and Acts came from the same author. They're not saying that it's from Luke. All that Luke Acts were circulated together as a single document. And they can tell by linguistic analysis that the author is the same person, who, regardless if his name was Luke or whoever. So that's a certainty. Okay. One thing that I want to correct Matt on is it's not consensus that the Gospels were written that early. That it is true that that's a common evangelical kind of argument, and it's a minority. The modern consensus is that Mark was either written shortly before 70 AD, like in late 69, or in 70, or like as late as 71. Okay, and there's reasons for that. I could go into it. Then they think that like Matthew and Luke were written almost around the same time, independent of one another, using Mark, and that happened around 85. And then they think that John was the last gospel that came around 90 to 95. Okay, and so
Well,
the early dating is not consensus, even though that is a Christian apologetic. Okay, and the last thing I want to say, and then I'll just hand it over to whoever else wants to go. Brenda, it is true that we don't have any manuscripts, right? The earliest manuscript we have is like a P52, which is like a tiny credit card sized fragment of like the Gospel of John. And that most scholars think that it dates from like either 125 to 150 AD. Okay, but what they do is it's called internal textual evidence, right? And they can analyze textual evidence within it, like historical references. So if they have a historical reference, right, it has to have been before that reference. Do you understand? And they do deductions like that, and they move through, and they make, and that's how they go through. So we don't need the manuscripts to think that Mark was written in 70 AD. Like they think that Mark was written in 70 AD based on the heavy Roman and Latin bywords that are used, and it's thought to be written in a Roman community. It's also thought has heavy symbolisms of persecution, and Nero was persecuting Christians heavily in Rome around 64 AD. And that gels rather nicely. And then they think that given the temple reference, it probably happened like either in 69 with given the political climate that they knew the temple was going to fall, or right after the temple had fallen. And so some of those are the main reasons why they think it happened in a post-Nero Roman environment that Mark was written.
Yeah, those seem like thin inferences to me.
They're super huge. Like, for example, if you look at Mark, Brenda, Mark has the most Roman and Latin bywords. Okay, it has the most out of all of them. If you want, I can pull up a PDF. Like, they have words like centurion, denari, the word my name is Legion, for I am many. That is in Mark. Legion is a Roman word, and there's a shitload of them. Okay, and
they're not using those words in 125 AD.
Just listen to what I'm saying. Of all the
Were they
gospels,
not using those words? Did they stop using them?
I don't know. Just listen to what I'm about to say. Of all the four
did they
gospels,
stop using them?
No, they did not stop using
Listen
them.
to what I'm saying. Of all the four gospels, listen to what I'm saying.
The inference is
specious. Listen to what I'm saying. You're not listening. Of all the four gospels, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, the one that has the most Roman bywords, okay, 5 or 6 times as many than any other gospel, is the Gospel of Mark. It has heavy imagery of persecution, like over time and time again. Okay, given the Roman bywords and a heavy persecution, it was thought to be written either during the time of Nero, which is 64 AD, or just after. Given the references of the temple falling, which happened right around 70 AD, they think, given the political climate, it was either written in 69 with someone that knew the temple was going to fall, given the political and war climate, or it was written in 71 after the temple is fall. And so that is the reason.
I don't get the inference. I don't get the inference. Just because it has these words in it, I'm supposed to think it was written around a certain time. Why?
I'm trying to simplify the argument in bullet points for you. If there's reasons why the modern scholarly consensus of Mark is written in 70. I can give you more. There's another argument. It's called Markan priority. Markan priority talks about the literary dependence of Matthew and Luke on Mark. Okay, we know very, very well that Matthew and Luke used Mark as the basis and then added stuff to it, for either from another source that they had called Special M or Special L for Mark and Luke respectively. Yeah, or the source of Q. Okay, Q source is obviously the sayings of Jesus that are not found in Mark, but are found in both Matthew and Luke. Okay, so Matthew and Luke had access to Mark and what they think is this hypothetical Q document. Given the fact that they think that Matthew and Luke were written in 84 to 85 based on this Council of Jamnia argument, I can run you through that. Based on the fact that it was written in 85 and based on the fact that Mark is their predecessor, they think Mark was probably written before 85 because it's his predecessor. Given the fact that these manuscripts take a long time to circulate in that type of first century environment, it's rational to assume, given all the other evidence, that Mark is dated around 70. And that's the arguments that all the modern scholars, Bart Ehrman and all them boys say.
Seamus,
but there's counter arguments to that as well for earlier dates of Mark as well. And you should know that.
Those arguments right there, Matt, are the
I've studied them too.
consensus arguments.
Well, but the problem with consolidated consensus about this issue is that over the centuries, over the decades, the consensus is like a pendulum. It moves up, moves down, moves back, moves forward. The reason Mark would have all of these extra Roman type words in him is because of who he was addressing. He was definitely addressing the Roman Empire and the Gentiles in that context. So he would use those kind of things. And since the book of Luke is written before the book of Acts, the book of Acts contains no historical marker of the death of Peter, Paul, then logically it's written beforehand, and Luke before that. And you said Luke was written in 80. There are other arguments, but we shouldn't argue about this right here. The point is that the Gospels are written very early on and they're reliably preserved. And what we do is we translate from then, that direct language, to here what we have now in English. That's all. Not a big deal. It's not been copied and modified and corrupted.
Yeah, I can show you some of the notes that I have.
Yeah, I don't trust
What about the later edits to Mark? What about the later edits to Mark?
The marking ending, I can talk about that. The ending of Mark. In Mark 16, 9 through 20, there's 17 non-Markan words used in a non-Markan sense, and it has 2 theological errors in it. What it looks like is that a codex page probably fell off the codex documents, the book, and it looks like a scribe tried to fill it in and did the best he could. That's what it looks like. That's my opinion of it. And there's really 2 other major areas of linguistic, or let's just say copying problems. And one is in John 8, the woman caught in adultery, and the other one was called the comma Johannium, 1 John 5:7. Those are basically the major ones. And it's like 0.01% of the issue of the entire New Testament. It's negligible.
If you want, I just opened the document that I have on the dating of Mark, and I can actually give you a ton. Like I spent like a ton of time compiling this information. I can give you some of.
You're breathing heavy into your microphone. Can you?
Yeah, sorry.
Me?
You're breathing heavy into your microphone. Not you, Seamus.
Sorry about
the
that.
Reverend is.
Sorry. Yeah, I've been having breathing problems lately, so.
I know. Sometimes I find it's better if you put your mic up near your nose rather than.
Yeah, I moved it up, but yeah.
Because you've got a powerful enough voice that it'll do that without you having to.
So one way that they do the dating of Mark, they do this thing called hard upper limits and soft upper limits. What sets a hard upper limit is the earliest manuscript that we actually have in hand of Mark, right? And so the earliest actual fragment we have of Mark that I have here is P45, and that's dated to 250 AD, right? And that's dated through handwriting analysis.
And they also use ink and
can't be
paper
later than
and stuff. But
can't be later than 250 because of that manuscript. But there's a soft upper limit, right? Because there's a guy named Ignatius who's like a pre-Nicene kind of father, early Christian writer. And he actually quotes a lot of Matthew and Luke in some of his writings. And Ignatius is writing like 114 AD. And so what that means is Ignatius of Antioch. If Ignatius is quoting Matthew and Luke, and we know that Mark is the basis for Matthew and Luke, and he's quoting them in 115, then the soft upper limit is it can't be no later than 115. Okay, and then we start to reduce that through what's called internal evidences. Okay, and so the first one obviously is the temple reference. He says, "Not one stone here will be left on another; everyone will be thrown down." And we do know that the temple was destroyed around 70 AD. Okay, and so the author either has knowledge, so it was either written after the temple, okay, or it was written slightly before. Most scholars think it was written slightly after, okay? And the reasons is going to be the next stuff that I'm saying, okay? So if you look at all the Latin bywords here, I'm just going to call how many of them there are out for you. Here's all the Latin bywords that he uses. He uses modus, which is modius, which is a measure. That's in Mark 4:21. He uses legion for we are many in Mark 5:9 and 5:15. He uses denarii and denarius, which is a Roman coin, in Mark 15 and 15, chapter 15. He uses centurion, which he uses a primitive form of the word centurion, right? It's called centurio. And Matthew and Luke use a more modern form called eukratichones, and which is its equivalent in Greek, not Latin, which is super interesting because Mark's is using the Latin one, not the Greek, and so that's a super.
What was that word again?
So the word that Mark uses is centurion or centurio.
Yeah, but what's the Greek word?
The Greek word that Matthew and Luke use is ekatraches or something. Ekatraches, a katronches or something.
Ekatrontakes.
Yeah, that's it. You got it. You nailed it. And so that word is actually the Greek equivalent, but it's a more modern word. And so since Mark used the Latin one, that's more Roman. And then not just that, but it has heavy persecution references, right? And like I could go through them. I'm not going to sit here and bore you any longer than this, but if you go through it, there's over 20 persecution references. And if it's got that many Roman words, and the temple reference is setting it right around 70. We know that Nero was burning Christians alive after the fire in Rome in 64, and it was all hell was breaking loose with Nero, okay, shortly before his death, and he was persecuting the hell out of Christians. And so the idea is that this was probably written for a Roman audience in response to the heavy persecution under the reign of Nero, trying to harden the resolves of Christians. And that's why the majority, almost all of the modern scholars, secular and Christian alike, agree that Mark was written around 70 AD.
Were you going to say godless?
I have to go, so I just wanted to ask Matt a quick random question if he's here still.
Yeah.
Oh, you said earlier that you don't like debating atheists, or you don't hate atheists, but what do you think, like side 10, don't you think he hates them? And what do you think about when he wouldn't shake Matt Dillahunty's hand after he debated him?
I talked to Cy about that, and I'm trying to remember. He said something else had happened earlier, and I can't remember what it was. And so, man, I'm trying to remember. Sometimes you talk about it, it kind of comes back, but I can't remember.
It had something to do with the person who had organized the debate in the first place.
I heard they snubbed them somehow.
Yeah.
They what?
Something to do with the debate organizer was apparently.
It was something. Yeah. Sorry. Go ahead.
Apparently, Sci-10 had allegedly gone after her and said nasty things about her and stuff. And
well, Matt Dillahunty had debated about debating Matt. He gave Sci-10 such a hard time, but debated him about debating him for months ahead of time. And it was like torturing it through, arranging it through email bullshit. But Matt, do you remember thinking that whatever reason he gave, that it was justified then?
I'm trying to remember, and I remember thinking something like the impression was, "Oh, I didn't know that." And I think he tried to shake her hand later or something. I'm just sorry, I can't remember. I'm trying to put it together, but it's just not there. Maybe I could call up Cy sometime. And
I think it was taking a picture of them too, not just shaking their hand.
There was something else going on. Yeah. And I think Cy told me he wanted to shake hands or would have. But you know what? I could be misrepresenting it. I'm trying. I'm sorry. I can't recall. Sorry. Wish I could.
Okay, I gotta go. Matt, I bought the Christian Defense Manual to support carm.org as gratitude for your appearance here.
You did? Thank you.
Well, there's one, eh, Matt?
There's one. Now we know who that one went out to.
I couldn't help but take the shot. I'm sorry.
Yeah, that's okay. It was funny. I was laughing.
Popular is the store.
Yeah. I like shots. You take a
How
shot at me
popular
when it's
is the
funny,
store?
not malicious. That's no problem.
Yeah, if you. Oh, sorry.
No, I just wonder how popular the store is. Like Eric Hovind, Jesus Christ, have you guys been to Creation Today? More dinosaur toys than I've ever seen.
Hello, my name is Ken Hovind.
We have
I
a
was
lot of
born at an early
problems.
age.
We have a lot of problems with the CARM site. There's been some major issues, and I'm not happy about it. So, anyway.
Also, like, to get back to kind of what we're talking about, there's another way that you can work backwards to the Gospels. You know how, like, I was telling you about that P52 fragment of John, I think is from like maybe 125 AD. There used to be this hypothesis based on this thing called like the higher Christology on John. Like John has this like higher view of Jesus than like anyone else, like clearly explicitly calling him God, when most of the other Gospels just do it implicitly. And so the posit was by these guys that were German radicals, like the 1800s. And these German radical guys posited that due to that kind of legendary embellishment of the Christology, that John was probably written in the 3rd century, right? Which is like that, and that was the most of the critical scholars at the time supported that view. And what's interesting is once they found P52, the game was up. Like it just smashed it out of the park. That was no longer tenable. And so, like, if you think that P52 is from like around 125 due to the paleography, then you think that it's couldn't be the original, and they had to have circulated, right? And then you know that Matthew and Luke predate that, and you need to fit a few years in between it. You know, they all nest pretty nicely. 70 for Mark, 85 for Matthew and Luke, because we think they're written about the same time. And then John probably around 90 to 95, probably no later, given the fragment of P52.
So where does this all go, guys? Does this just help support?
It's the supernatural beauty of the Bible.
Claim that Jesus
I don't see how
existed?
it supports anything. I don't see how it supports
No,
anything.
no. It's not supporting anything.
I think
It is rebutting the atheist's claim about the
Oh, there we go.
date the Bible is dated on it, and that's what I'm rebutting, and it has been rebutted.
You cut out completely.
That's okay. We understood. Understood. Reverend, did you ever see The Passion of the Christ?
Yes, once.
Oh. Like I haven't been a Christian for years and years. That scene where
where what?
Well, they're scourging him.
And
they're just scourging him. And then they stop and I'm like, no, hang on. They stop and I'm like, oh, thank God. And even me as an atheist, I'm like, oh, thank God. And then the Roman officer at the rickety table sticks his hand out and flips it over. And I'm like, oh no. Oh, guys,
Well,
come on.
You know, the actor who was playing Jesus, they put a piece of wood on his back, and then they were using a real cat of nine tails because it had to look real, and they put a wood on his back. And he said that one of the strikes, one of the barbs, just once hit him, and he said it was excruciating.
I don't even understand how. Because I mean,
they did that to a lot of people.
Well, I mean that's just the point I was going to make. I mean, yes, Jesus according to Christianity, Jesus undertook a great deal of torture, but the Romans beat the living bejabbers out of anything that moved. There was a lot of people that I just can't imagine anybody surviving under like one side of being scourged. Never mind two sides.
A lot of people died before they got to the cross. But remember, Jesus he's walking around all over the place. Plus, he'd been a carpenter, so he's in decent shape. You know.
Well, that's all of human history. People have tortured other people.
Yeah,
I know, but geez, those are brutal. I think Passion of the Christ. I think of all the film depictions of Pilate I've ever seen, I think that one comes closest to the sense I got from him when I read the Bible. I think that one was the closest one. He was a guy who he'd just been read the riot act by Rome because of his failure to keep the Jewish people, quote unquote, under control after that big riot they had. And he was just like, He was just putty molded into Roman armor. And I mean, his wife was like, like Marge Simpson every time he did, just looking at him, just giving him the look. And it just, no, I got to put this guy to death, because if not, these Jews are going to start trouble. That's the last thing I need.
Passion of the Christ was a 2-hour Christian smut film.
No, snuff, not smut.
Yeah, snuff film.
That's a
What do you
different
guys
thing.
think of Noah or Risen?
I didn't know there were Christian smut films. Actually, there probably is on the internet these days.
I meant to
there
say
was
snuff. I meant to
there
say
was
snuff.
one made back at the turn of the century, I think, called The Last Temptation of Christ, and that was probably
Canadian
more.
film, no, Gus?
What?
It's a Canadian film, no?
I don't
Oh,
know.
no,
All I
that's
know is it
Montreal.
starred Willem Dafoe. It starred Willem Dafoe as Jesus. Oh, you're thinking of the Jesus of Montreal. I think that's something else entirely.
Yeah.
I'm Canadian,
I
by the
really
way.
enjoyed Risen. And I like that Noah scene where it shows creation. I thought that was very powerful.
I liked the new Moses video with Christian Bale.
Let's, Matt, have you seen Noah?
Yeah, it was pretty dumb.
Yeah, but did you not like the creation scene? I thought it was really powerful and quite moving.
No, you're talking about the one that had the rock monsters?
They weren't rock monsters. Come on now.
Yeah, I'm trying to remember what it was. I just remember about the rock
They were
monsters or something.
God.
those were the angels.
Some angels had deigned to
Menacing
stand by man when God threw him out of the garden, and for that, man punished them by binding them to the earth with chains of earth that were basically rock. That's why as they were being destroyed, they were released into their, because they were holding back the hordes of Jubal Cain's people, right? And as they were holding back the hordes, God deemed that was enough of a mitzvah to allow them to be reclaimed into heaven.
Wow. Well, that's certainly from the book
You gotta
of
actually,
Second Chronicles.
I'm sure.
Come
Like, I'm
on,
not saying it's
yeah.
biblical. I'm not
That's
saying
for
it's
sure it's
biblical.
not.
I'm not saying it's biblical, but that's what. But at least give it the due of its.
Well, I saw it and wrote a review on it and was not impressed, but whatever.
I saw that review, and I think you were unfair in some places.
What did you think about God's Not Dead?
Oh boy,
I haven't seen it. Oh, wait a minute. I think I did, and to be honest, I remember going, "You guys could have done better."
Yeah, it was a horrible movie. It's a horrible movie.
It was too set up, too contrived. Made the atheist professor not really, competent. I didn't think it did everybody a great job, a great service. I would have done things differently.
Well,
like just get a mosh pit going on and settle it.
It was just stereotypical. The atheist professor was just an egotistical prick, and the Christian boy was the most humble, pious, unassuming person possible. And then you had the girlfriend who was just like,
come on,
pick me over Jesus.
Okay, well, look, guys, look. I wrote a book called Atheistica, a small novel. All right, and I wrote it against atheism, but I didn't depict the atheists as morons and evil people, and if anything,
the standard trope is that atheists just fucking hate God, because they have some traumatic event in their life, and then all of a sudden they hate God, so that they're rebelling. But the other thing that was like really stupid about that movie is like the first day the kid goes into, it's philosophy 101. It's not like atheism 101. It's philosophy 101. And before he teaches them how to philosophize whatsoever, he just said, all right, if you don't believe in God, you gotta have to fucking defend that view.
Well, that's what I encountered when I went to secular college. I went to 2-year secular college, and I went to an class, and before the class even got started, the professor attacked the Bible. Flat out did. I was in the only class I ever took where the Bible was not attacked was in mathematics. No, it was mathematics. Should what?
A professor
should
ought
what?
to attack.
Should,
a professor ought to attack.
Wait, let him finish. He ought to attack what?
Ought to attack religious ideologies.
in a philosophy class, right? Like if you're going to a philosophy class, you have to teach the students how to philosophize before they engage with any arguments, right?
Well, let me just tell you that what happened in that particular class, I was petitioning the class to get in. I happened to sit in the front row. So I had to be nice. I'm going to get in the class. And so he said, what we're going to learn here is all kind of stuff and why the Bible's not true. I mean, like, what? It wasn't Buddhism. It wasn't the Quran.
Good for him.
It was the Bible. And I said, well, I couldn't help it. My stupid hand went up by itself. I said, what do you mean the Bible's not true? He goes, well, it asks us to do impossible things. And I said, like what? And he says, well, the Bible says, be perfect as God is perfect. I said, oh, you mean Matthew 5:48? The context starts in Matthew 5:43 about loving everybody equally and therefore be perfect as your Father in heaven is perfect. I said, that's what that talks about. And he was shut down in the class. And when I went to go up to him, after the class to have him sign my petition so I could get in, he said, no, we're full. I walked out, turned around and watched him sign a petition for other. He lied. He flat out lied. And so when I went to a second philosophy class later, get my mouth shut to get in. And once I was in, I could raise my hand and start asking questions. And the professor actually, after a while, stopped attacking the Bible. He wouldn't attack anything else, just the Bible. I don't have any problem with things being cross-examined, but folks, I'm going to tell you, there's an incredible bias against Christianity in the schools, and that's just not right. If you want to criticize, do it all, and criticize philosophy itself, because there are conflicting schools of philosophical thought. How come that isn't brought out? Yeah.
With that, Matt, with
What
that,
was the class that you were?
That's why.
What was the
Couldn't hear
class that you
too many
were?
people
What was
talk.
the
What?
class that you were in, Matt? What
Which
was
class?
the class?
The philosophy class that you got kicked out of. What kind of philosophy class
What was
was it?
the
That's
what
what he
was
was
the
asking.
title of the class?
I can't understand. When both of you guys talk, I can't understand what you're saying.
What was the title? What was the title of the class?
Oh, I don't remember. It was back in the 80s. It was philosophy, blah, blah, blah.
You forgot the part where they slow clap you out of the room.
Were they what?
Slow
clapped you out of the room.
I couldn't understand the words. But I was in art class. The Bible got attacked. I was in geology class. The Bible. got attacked.
Wait. How did your art teacher attack the Bible? I want to hear this.
I remember. I was sitting back in the class, and he had this picture up. He was a really good teacher. I learned a lot about art. It was really great. And all of a sudden he goes, blah, blah, blah. And that's why the Bible can't be right about such and such. I remember going, what? Where did that come from? And I actually went up to him after the class. What's that?
You just have a chip. You just have a chip on your
No,
shoulder.
I don't have a chip on my shoulder. And I'm sitting there and I'm going, oh, come on. And he never attacked anything else, just the Bible.
Well, I mean, you wouldn't have found a lot of Qurans lying around in the 1980s in the United States, would you?
A lot of what?
Qurans. Quran.
Oh, I guess it makes it okay. Yeah, as long as whatever it is.
It's okay.
Look, come on, guys. The Quran's there. The Bhagavad Gita's there. There are in the psychology class. There's psychology methodology that contradict each other, but they were not attacked. The philosophy itself isn't attacked. There's conflicting ideas in philosophy. Look, it was extremely biased, and it was.
It's okay though. It's okay.
Oh, it's okay to be biased?
Yes.
Wow.
It's okay.
Oh, wow.
It's okay for people. It's okay for people to say things that you find offensive.
I didn't say that.
You don't have a right to not be
I
offended.
didn't say that. Did anybody say don't offend me?
Matt,
I didn't say that at all.
Matt, hold on.
Well,
Brenda thinks that anything dealing with the Bible is an assault on common sense. So that's where she's coming
that's
from.
not what I said.
I said there was a bias against
offended.
Christianity.
You're obviously offended by people who dismiss the Bible.
No, I'm not.
That is a good
No, I'm
thing.
not.
People
No, I'm not. I'm not offended by people who dismiss the Bible.
You're free
I'm
to be
offended.
though.
I'm offended when people use the Lord's name in vain. That offends me.
Or
But if people want to disagree with, the Bible, disagree. I'm in here talking with you guys. You disagree. Yeah. That's not offensive. But I'll tell you something. When I went to that college, after a while, the professors stopped doing it in the classes because I would raise my hand and I would challenge them politely. One time, I'm in the cultural anthropology class, and the teacher was so pro-evolution it was ridiculous. So I went ahead and did some study. And I think it was on the Australopithecines. And I had all the documentation from the secularists who said that whatever it was hominid ancestor, I think it was Australopithecines, but I don't remember now. It's been so long. I had the documentation in my hands about why it was not a hominid ancestor. This professor, I could not believe what she said. Look, just listen to the story, please. And so I had the documentation from like the curator, the guy from I think when it was from England, London, England, the repository, the Museum of Archaeology, and blah, blah, blah. I mean, these guys were not Christians. They were secularists. And I had the documentation about a particular hominid that was not in the hominid line that they said is not. So she's in class, and of all things, she actually said that the one I studied, there was a whole bunch. She actually picked the one I studied. I couldn't believe it. I had the documentation in my notebook. I raised my hand. And I said, excuse me, but according to Dr. So-and-so, he's got more degrees than a thermometer, and he's the curator of the Natural History Museum of Smithsonian, he's blah, blah, blah. And the other guy, across the pond, he says this, and I mean, I just read what they said. And you know what she said? They're wrong. I raised my hand. I raised my hand in the class because I was going to ask her, well, wait a minute. This is a junior college. These guys have got more degrees. They study this specifically. This is what they said. And it's not just one guy, not just two, but I think I had 3 quotes. I said, these guys, they're not Christians. They're the evolutionists, and they say this. And I wanted to ask her, why are they all wrong and you're the one who's right? She wouldn't call on me. I kept my hand up for at least 20 minutes in the class, pissed her off to no end. And when the class was finally over, I walked out. And I said, I'll be back.
Oof.
She didn't.
And then everyone stood up and clapped.
No. I was the last one out. I made sure I was the last one. I just said, I'm going to be back. And I'll tell you, she walked away from me. She would not. And the professors in the school, they were to some degree afraid of me because I wasn't mean, I wasn't rude, but I challenged them in their biased assertions. And there were plenty of them. I remember geology. I remember this so well. I'm talking to the geology guy. We're going to his office. I go, Mr. So-and-so, whatever it was. I said, I can't remember exactly the conversation. I said, well, wait a minute. You know about the missing links in the fossil record? He goes, yeah. I said, and you know about punctuated equilibrium as a theory that was proposed in order to account for the gaps? Yeah. And you know that some of the dating methods are well, you have to make assumptions of uniformitarianism when you know that that's not a valid assumption. And you know about these things. He goes, yeah. And I said, well, why do you believe evolution is true? He goes, because it is.
Yeah,
I remember dumbfounded.
Uniformity in
all
nature.
you've done is make appeals to authority.
Okay, well, whatever. But I'm just saying that the basis, the bias against Christianity in the colleges is astounding.
Well, facts aren't biased.
I think part of the reason why there's a bias against Christianity in the college is that particularly in the so-called hard sciences, just about every single time we've lifted up a rock of natural mystery, we haven't found God sitting there in a lawn chair with a mojito.
Yeah, that's called a category mistake. You don't find God that way. The evidence that you required. I'm actually working on an article that for the website, and I'm also reading books on evolution. I love science, and I still do, and I'm reading books on evolution on both sides.
See, I don't believe that a God that's capable of acting.
Wouldn't you say that? Wouldn't you say that the alleged bias in the school system is the result of like post-Enlightenment philosophy, the Age of Enlightenment, sort of people like move away from religion and more to science and rationality?
Yeah.
You have to go, Matt?
I do have to. I'm supposed to go 5 minutes ago because my wife, she needs me. At 10 o'clock at night, I just quit. I go spend time with her, and it helps her.
No,
Yeah,
by all means. We were happy to have you. Come back.
All right. Yes. Thanks.
Watch
I appreciate
Noah,
that.
it was fun.
Yeah, I want to continue, but I got, I honestly, I'm going to spend time with my wife. She just needs
like
me,
to
okay?
debate you on evolution sometime.
Okay, sure. All right. Okay, I'm out, guys.
It
Talk
would
to you
be
later.
like shooting fish in a
Shalom,
barrel.
Matt. Shalom.
Okay. Peace, thanks.
Mazel
How do I
tov.
close this thing down? Oh, there it is. Okay, see you guys.
Take care.
Facts are biased.
We wish her all the best and a speedy recovery.
Thanks. I appreciate it. She's really got some problems. I'm serious. It's pretty bad.
Dis-a-t-elle bonjour français Canada.
Oh, that's nice. Okay, I forgot it. Okay, I'm out of here. We'll see you guys.
Bye-bye.
Bonjour.
Take it easy.
When the hell did you learn French?
Excuse me, Brenda?
My
You're a
country
piece
is
of shit.
bilingual.
No, Brenda,
One
you
is-
were
You're a
muted
piece of
because the
shit.
only thing that you could do the entire time he was saying was say, no,
No,
that's
you
wrong,
shouldn't
no,
have
you're wrong, no,
mods
that's wrong,
because you
no,
take
that's
out
wrong.
your personal. You take out your
And
personal
I didn't
disputes.
just mute you, Brenda. I muted several people who were doing the same
Yeah,
thing.
you're
So
a
there
piece
was
of
no
shit.
Yeah,
bias.
Kathleen.
Nice.
Kathleen, hold on. Like, I didn't like what Brenda was doing, but it definitely wasn't worth the mute. Like,
Well,
that's
the problem is, okay, whether we like it or not, if we want Matt here, we have to take it easy on him. As repugnant a concept as that is, if we want him here, we're going to have to take it easy on him. Otherwise,
I'm
otherwise
curious on this. Why do you want Matt Slick in here? What do you find interesting?
Because you must
Because
know
he's the
your
man,
enemy.
bro. He's the man.
Because you
Stop talking
must
shit,
know
man.
your enemy.
He's an idiot
What
who
does that
thinks
mean?
he's an
Well,
idiot
keeps
who thinks that science offends his God.
Hold on, there's more pressing issues. You just called Kathleen a piece of shit.
Yeah, well, Brenda wasn't the only one muted, right? I also muted